Hello and welcome to the Kingston Police Services Board meeting number 2311 being held Thursday, September 21st, 2023. To start, I'm going to ask the Acting Chief Fraser to provide an update respect to the Queen's movement.
Oh, thank you, Chair Stearns. Okay, I know we've submitted a report as well in regards to Queens here, but certainly the move-in weekend, I guess. Of course, we have been up staffing for any related issues that arise as a result of our post-secondary institutions returning to school. As a little more thorough or a little more details, we can tell you on move-in weekend that we deployed extra officer and resources out in an enforcement team strategy. They started around 6 p.m. And with obviously their objective is first of all and foremost is public safety, safety of property and safety of people. And then secondary was enforcement of our applicable provincial legislation and federal laws. And they also worked very closely with bylaw. So hand in hand working with our bylaw team from the city, which is a very effective crew of people on the ground. And we're very thankful for their partnership. However, it didn't go without incident. Unfortunately, this year we saw approximately 5,000 students or more take over the street shortly after 11 p.m. We quickly declared it a nuisance party and waited the obligatory 15-minute period and then started issuing offense notices and administrative monetary penalty tickets. So our enforcement strategy, and I'm reading a report here from one of the officers who was in charge on the ground, and the technique of enforcement seems to be working very well. It's eliminating the need for us to resort to lining up officers and pushing the crowd out of the way. They tend to leave on their own when the tickets get issued. So move-in weekend and the following 2 weekends that have occurred, we've laid just under or just over 600 tickets. That's just from the police, and bylaws issued a number of tickets as well. On move-in weekend, we had a number of issues outside the enforcement strategies that occurred. We had one individual who suffered a pretty severe fracture, and unfortunately, because of the crowd size, it was very difficult to get the ambulance in, so we had to formulate a plan to get the ambulance in to render aid. Fortunately, it wasn't a life-threatening injury. We had an individual throwing a cement block through a window. That person was arrested and charged. We had another person who was able to get his car onto the street, University Avenue, driving through the crowd, which we're very fortunate. That individual was charged with careless driving. And, on top of our liquor tickets, open liquor seemed to be our number one every weekend. Public intoxication, there was 3 arrests on move-in weekend. We laid 7 Highway Traffic Act offenses, and then 11 people were charged with underage drinking, and then the 1 criminal charge for mischief. So the report also details about, they're constantly assessing the crowd and the crowd dynamic and making determinations based on how the crowd's behaving. And it was unfortunately the later in the night, the intoxication levels increased, and the number of aggravated people became increasingly larger. However, our staff members say the deployment method was effective. I guess the best way I could say this is we applied less resources than we have in the past, and we've achieved about 1,100% results more, or we increased our results by deploying in the enforcement team. So despite the fact there may be less boots on the ground, there's a much higher enforcement strategy. And just to compare, the same week in last year, there was 40 tickets issued compared to just over 500 in this year. So lots going on, as we've said, and as I continue to say, being the Kingston Police are never going to stop this. There's been strategies over year, and I haven't been in Kingston that long, but I've heard over the past 20 years, we have other inspectors who are here can attest to fencing the area, moving the party to different locations, trying all kinds of different strategies, and we're still basically here having this same discussion that we've had for 20 years or 20 plus years. So despite that, we'll continue to do our enforcement initiatives, and we'll continue that, and hopefully with our liaison teams, which is another really important part of getting the messaging out. And I guess for the people who are on the ground, increasingly each weekend, they're seeing less and less. So people were observed on the second and third weekend, you know, they're going between parties, but they're not carrying their open alcohol. They're actually putting it in they're ensuring that it's closed container and that they're following the laws. And that's all we're asking. And so if we can continually see that, we're hoping for a successful homecoming and other events that take place. But barring any questions, that's kind of how the first few weeks have gone.
Thank you. Thank you. So, pardon me? Christian, thank you. Go ahead. You're on mute.
Thank you for that brief, very helpful. Chief Fraser, just 3 quick points. Can you let us know how well you think the plan and the planning stacked up against what you actually encountered, and where you feel sort of you met and exceeded sort of expectations, and where perhaps you fell short, not personally or the service, but perhaps you encountered something that sort of you hadn't anticipated. The second is sort of the takeaways here in terms of preparations for homecoming. And the third is sort of any particular trends that you're seeing here, not just with regards to Kingston, but also, of course, with regards to other cities that are facing this challenge, and sort of the collective learning that everybody's able to do here. As you know, there's lots of concerns from Kingston citizens, both around the activities and around the costs. And so I think what we're hearing is that you're able to, you've been working on containing costs and while accelerating the overall outcomes that are desirable for the community. So maybe anything you can say in that regard.
Thank you, for sure. So as far as planning, obviously we start planning weeks and weeks in advance. So our planning preparation involves a lot of time. Our executive boardroom is generally full with staff, all the way from our civilian staff to senior managers to our logistics. As we're planning homecoming, which takes approximately, we started a few months ago, 3 months is generally our planning strategy. At the same time, we kind of plan for move-in in the first few weeks because we know historically there's issues then as well, but we just don't know the magnitude of it. What I can tell you is that I had members of our executive from the association come to me and applaud the manner in which our officers responded. And I can honestly say that's how I gauge that we're doing something right. The membership was positive in relation to our enforcement strategy, and that we are taking a stance and that we are doing something. And so when we have our management and our association working together, it's always a good thing. Hearing from the members who are on the ground that, and I can use the exact words, the crowd, as planned, bylaw stood with us, and we began bringing individuals on the outskirts back to bylaw who issued numerous amps. This caused the crowd to start to disperse very slowly. However, this technique of charging on the outskirts appears to be very successful. So we're seeing that, and we saw it at St. Patrick's Day, where our usual process, we deviated from that because enforcement was doing the trick. So I think our planning and with our liaison teams going out and messaging, it's really coming together. And I think instead of being consistently inconsistent, which seems to be a saying I say quite a bit, we want to be consistently consistent. And I think we're starting to develop a strategy where it doesn't matter what event, we have a map, we have a plan. And if you attend and you behave, then there's no issues. But if you attend and break laws, that we're there to enforce those laws. So we'll continue doing that. We didn't anticipate that on move-in weekend that you'd have over 5,000 students come and take over the streets, because we generally don't see that. And I knew that was probably something unexpected from anywhere when a friend called me from London to ask how homecoming went the Labor Day weekend. And when I advised that it was not homecoming, that it was just move-in, they were shocked because they have their own share of issues there. And they were completely dumbfounded that that all took place at move-in weekend. So obviously, preparing for homecoming, the best way to predict future behavior is by past behavior. And we use intelligence to basically justify our response. And if anyone has any questions about how we're going to respond to homecoming, you just have to look at how move-in weekend went and the weekend after and the nights in between. Clearly, despite all of our efforts of messaging, clearly we're going to see large groups, and we're still, like I said, we're issuing over 600 tickets in a 3-week period compared to less than 100 overall last year. So obviously we need to get the message through, and if that's how it is, so our take home is just to be prepared, and we are going to be prepared, and we consistently assess everything that we believe is going to occur. We watch intelligence. Obviously, that's the intelligence is going to tell us a lot too, and that allows us to modify our response. We've modified our response compared to last year already. I won't get into our operational planning, but I certainly will say lots of modifications going on and a lot of people around the table putting a lot of hours in, trying to make sure that A, we keep everybody safe, A, we keep their property safe, and then B, that none of our officers or staff get hurt. So I can certainly say that. And as far as trends go, I don't think we can compare to any other community. Frankly, anybody I know who works in those communities doesn't have the same issues as we do. And it's unique, I think, to Kingston. There are large events that take place, homecomings take place, but they're all, like I said, everyone looks to us because what's going on here. And of course, we're usually the last homecoming. So we have to take into consideration what every other homecoming does, because it's usually a trend that whatever happens in other communities occurs here. So we're going to continue doing that. And I applaud our people who go out on a daily basis and face this. The enforcement team strategy, like I said, is certainly, we've got our people who want to be there, and you put the right people in the right places, the right things happen. And we're certainly at that point right now. So very positive for the way the future will go. And like I said, it's that we can't ignore this. We have to respond, and there's got to be a better answer. And we've tried numerous things. So as I always say, we're only as good when we work all together. So if we're asking anyone, if somebody has a great idea, bring it forward. And we ask our staff that regularly as well, if they've got an idea. And I know I've thought I was the smartest guy in the room and brought up to our inspectors about what about this, what about that? And they're like, yeah, 2018, 2016, 2013, 2012. So I got to the list of all of my great ideas, showing them how smart I was, and every one of them had already been done. So, but that doesn't stop us. We'll continue looking for alternatives and options as best we can.
Thank you. Christian, you're good with that?
That's terrific. I just want to commend the chief for, I think, a relatively modestly sized police service, being able to effectively police without really any coercive power 5,000 people, I think, is a testament to the professionalism of the service and its leadership.
Thanks. Go ahead, Jimmy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. First, I want to thank you, the Chief, for your leadership and working hard to keep the Kingstonians safe. I have a quick question. With the new strategy you applied this year to the move-in week and also that St. Patrick Day, did you have any kind of feedback from the community, how the community living around because the moving in and homecoming is a very sensitive matter to Kingston for many, many years. And also I want to request to share with us that what was the response from your own team, from the people who was on board with you, and then how confident you feel now that the same strategy, same plan we can execute on the homecoming as well.
Certainly. Thank you. Yeah, you know what? Certainly from the community perspective, we have people that are happy. We have people that are unhappy. So certainly what I've heard, depending where you live, if you live there, you're not very happy. If you live outside, you're happy that there's enforcement taking place. If you watch any of the social media, you can watch people battle back and forth about it, some are in agreement, some are opposed. You know, I think people would probably look back to the pandemic and go, those were the best because they never occurred. So, you know, but the fact of the matter is we've moved beyond that. So certainly from the public's position, I've had people say, why don't you just arrest them and throw them all in jail? Yeah, it's really doesn't work that way, and we're acting within the law, and that's what we have to do, and we'll continue to act within the law. So that's one. Certainly from our inside our organization, giving our staff advance notice, obviously changing shifts, having the right people assigned to do the job. You know, we put out what the objectives were to our staff prior to them signing up for any shifts, because we just don't have enough people in patrol to do it through our patrol section as part of their regular duty. But we were very specific with what our objectives are. And so we got the people who came out ready to do enforcement. And as I indicated, I certainly met with the association, who had not received a whole lot of negative comments, if any. I don't want to speak on their behalf, but did express that this manner was good. And further that obviously the logistics planning, we just put out our matrix for next month for homecoming. So people have a month's notice on what they're working and what their shift's going to be. We're trying to accommodate so people aren't working too long of hours. We're also utilizing some of our partners to assist where they can. And at the end of the day, I think for homecoming, and when we look at St. Patrick's Day, we employed the new enforcement model on St. Patrick's Day with a minimum number of people assisting us in the public order crowd management, which is really what it is. They're professionals of crowd management. And I think what's really important, what sets us apart, as it was discussed, we're kind of a medium-sized organization. We don't have a crowd control unit. We don't have, and control is not the right word, it's a crowd management unit. We don't have that where other agencies do, and they're able to cut their costs by sending their unit to other universities. So I can use Hamilton, London, and Windsor as an example, where those three will get together for London. And London's you know, responsible for their London people, and the other public order units or crowd management units that attend are responsible for their own unit. So we don't have the ability to barter and trade off where we send ours somewhere. Now we are working on a regional crowd management unit involving a number of smaller services in our area to try and establish something for our area, so we have something to offer. But right now, when we look at crowd management, we have the OPP in Ottawa, and of course, after the Freedom Convoy, everything's changed. So I know when I explained this, and I'm glad you brought it up, Mr. Hassan, because at the end of the day, people look and go, okay, how come we're not doing it the same way we did it 5 years ago? Everything changes. You know, legislation changes, court rulings change, lawsuits get filed and resolved. And so what we're trying to do, we sit and consistently discuss this among senior management about liability to the city of Kingston, liability to the organization, and what we need to do as an adequate and proper response and adequate and effective policing in our community. And that's what we'll continue to do. And we're just at a little bit of a disadvantage because we don't have all the resources we'd like to, just because of the sheer numbers and the sheer cost to start. But I think if we kind of start small and work our way up, eventually we'll get there. But I wish I could say we're going to change the face of all of this overnight. But I think the inspectors that are present with me here will agree that they've been doing it for 20 years, and we're trying to find what's the right thing. And we're certainly on a track right now that we think is. So we're going to continue that and move forward in a positive manner and make this a positive. We know what's happening, so let's make it positive and not negative. Let's work on working together versus working against each other. And as a community, come together. And hey, like I said, if there's someone out there with the greatest idea ever, please pass it along to me, because we're happy to work with everyone.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate all of the force and the member of the force and you for hard work and keeping up safe. And we are fully confident we are in good hand in coming years. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thanks for your presentation. Is there any other questions? No? Good. Then we're going to move on. Is there a disclosure of a conflict of interest? No, very good. Can I get an approval of the agenda as amended? Christian, thank you. Gail, all in favor? Thanks. And then can I get the adoption of the minutes from meeting 2310 held on July 20th, 2023? Thank you, Gail. Me, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. And then is there the following communications from the Ministry of the Solicitor General, the Police Services Board, Canada Association of Police Governance, Office of the Chief of Independent Police Review Director be received? First or seconder, Gail? Jimmy, thank you. All in favor? Is there any questions with respect to any of the following communications? No, good, thank you. Then delegations, information reports. I'm going to call for a motion. If anyone has any questions regarding the acting chief would like to speak to any of the reports. First or seconder? Oh, good. Okay. Then, did you want to speak to any of the report?
If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but I think they're pretty self-explanatory. We're just trying to keep the
Good.
board apprised.
Okay. Very good.
Chair,
Yeah.
perhaps a good opportunity to remind the audience that the assistant to the board prepares these well ahead of each meeting so that everything that comes up here is available to the public in a transparent fashion
On the website.
on the website.
Yeah, 1 week in advance. Thank you for that, Christian. Okay. Thank you for preparing those. Then we're going to ask about if there's a discussion for the recommendation. Oh, okay, of the Kingston Police Services Board member remuneration. So has everyone seen that? Okay, can I get a first or a seconder to look at it? Very good. Okay, Gail, Christian, thank you. And there's basically this hasn't been looked at since 2010, I believe, or 2023, just to become to get it up to a level which is where most board cities have it. So can I get is there any questions about it? No? Then can I get have it moved for seconder? Thank you, Gail. Jimmy, Christian, all in favor? Thank you. Good. Okay, then motions. So Kingston Police Services Board ratify the motion passed by poll quorum. And in the next scheduled public board meeting, the board appoint Yeager McCormick, Jesse Vandermeer, and Tatum Hennessy as officers of the Kingston Police effective August 24th, 2023. I get a first or seconder? Thank you, Gil. Yep. Jimmy, all in favor? Thank you. Was that there? It was quite enjoyable, actually. Yeah. Seeing them sworn in. And then there's new business. There's a staffing update, retirements. Speak to that. You want me to? Sure. Okay. Retirement of Constable Kevin Williams, effective August 31st, 2023, and retirement of civilian John Howes, Director of Finance, effective September 31st, 2023. And then promotions, the following promotions were effective August 25th, 2023. Acting Staff Sergeant Jay Finn, promoted to rank of Staff Sergeant. Acting Staff Sergeant Cam Go, promoted to the rank of Staff Sergeant. Good job. Acting Sergeant Tim Kloss, promoted to the rank of Sergeant. Acting Sergeant Jeff Graham, promoted to the rank of Sergeant, and Constable Greg Boyce, promoted to the rank of Sergeant. Congratulations to all of them. And if there's any, so that's good. Okay. I don't need no. And then Next would be the bylaw number 23 -01 alarm regulation and response bylaw. And was there any questions to that? No.
Did you, Chair or the Chief, maybe briefly want to, since this has ramifications for the public, direct ramifications, perhaps just very briefly
Greg?
explain the details?
Yeah, we'll ask Greg to come up and talk to it. Greg Sands, thank you. Yeah, please do.
Hello, thank you. This is was a bylaw was created for the alarm registration in response to alarms here in the city of Kingston. There's a registration process put forward as well. There's a process for fines for excessive false alarms, but this just lays it out a little more clear than what we've had in the past of what we expect. I guess the first 4 paragraphs kind of explain it the most as the Kingston Police respond to many requests for emergency responses caused by an alarm system where the Kingston Police finds no evidence that an unauthorized entry on any criminal record or criminal activity has occurred. So this is just a way for us to monitor these alarms and a registration process and a financial side of it as well. Thank you.
Any questions for that? Have a motion.
I'm afraid I don't have any sound.
So I think leading the discussion may not be the best, but perhaps I could introduce the discussion
Sure.
and just try to frame it. So this was an item that came to council, I believe, about a month ago. Of course, about significant damage to city infrastructure theft, and there was a number of questions that were raised around the council table about the scourge of copper theft and other similar supplies, and how that can be managed. If there's opportunity, for example, there were questions about like at the resale point of view. Are there ways to be able to catch, people that are obviously trying to offload these materials? Is there somewhere where these questions can be asked so that people have to prove that they came into possession of it, obviously in a proper way and not through theft. So to be honest, probably a number of councillors that were really interested in it. And obviously we just thought it would be great, Chief, if you or your team could speak to it a little bit. I think it's certainly top of mind, not only for council, but obviously for many people in the community as well.
Certainly, yeah. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, at the end of the day, obviously, this is a prolific offense occurring all over Canada, and certainly in Kingston's not exempt, and Belleville, Brockville, Gananoque, it doesn't matter. It's so we're seeing a lot of it. Mainly repeat customers, and we had just in the news where we arrested a couple the other day. They spent about as much time as we're going to discuss here today in jail and are back out. Most are already out on similar counts. So like I said the other night, that we spend most of our time chasing the same people, but we continue to chase them. We also have other strategies that we've employed, certainly for our area, without getting into our investigative strategy on what we're doing. But certainly it's a serious matter, and we take the matter seriously, and it's very difficult because I can see, just out the window here, the power lines right there, and they're everywhere. And it doesn't matter whether you're rural, you're in town, wherever you are, there's lots of access and areas where people can certainly get in to get at this stuff. And we're seeing where it used to just be stolen from warehouses and yards, and that's increased because everybody's taken security to a new level. That then causes people to go out, and we used to see where there was low-lying wires, those would be cut, and taken. Now we're seeing telephone poles being cut down so they can access the wires. Obviously, there's lots of money into it. I know our patrol section, who's done a tremendous job in the on the ground at the time events, and then generally it's followed up with our detective branch, who's been obviously employing a number of various strategies to help mitigate, certainly in our area. And we know what happens when you do enforcement in one area, that it just goes to a neighboring area, as we saw in the news the other day where Belleville had a number of incidents in Napanee. So we know people are very transient in this for the most part, because you have obviously a heavy weighted material that you have to get from A to B. Our inspector in charge of criminal investigations is here. He's got a couple of strategies that he thinks are going to be something that may help us moving forward. So I'd turn it over to Inspector Brian Pete here to make a few comments.
Thanks, Chief. Good afternoon, board members. We've kind of touched on a lot of the higher level points. Unfortunately, property crime and specifically the theft of precious metals has been an issue around here and other communities for decades. I think what we're dealing with now is higher sophistication, higher frequency, and increased scope, which is why we're getting entire communities affected by theft of bell line. Obviously, it takes out your phone lines and your internet, which is a huge issue for public safety, especially, vulnerable communities not being able to reach 911 for whatever reason. I can assure you we are throwing a lot of resources at these thefts. In fact, you could probably trace the increase to these to the beginning of this year. And if you look over our records, we have made a lot of arrests for very similar things, including just stopping people at 3, 4 in the morning who perhaps have some of this material and certainly the tools that would allow them to collect it. It's not always a set of facts or circumstances that would lead to arrest or charge, but there has been charges laid throughout the year. Another unfortunate thing is that by and large, people don't care too much about property crime until it impacts them. And I mean, that kind of makes sense. But if you speak to people that it is impacting, it is a huge issue. And it's obviously always a big issue for us. Similar to other property crimes, the theft of precious metals is generally for a cash conversion to buy other things, quite often, and it's normally drugs. You have people that are committing pretty much their entire lives to committing theft. As I said, they've become more sophisticated. There are inherent difficulties in investigating these types of crime, although we have experienced some recent success, likely because it's been in the limelight and patrol officers in our detective's office have a stronger focus on it. Certainly not unique to Kingston. In fact, there are multiple municipalities in Ontario and across Canada, including provinces like BC and Alberta, who have enacted bylaws that sort of govern the licensing and operating rules of salvage yards and metal recyclers. So I've looked into a few of those. It'd be quite similar to the pawn shop bylaws where you can't accept this type of property without demanding government ID, which includes photo, taking down some details about the circumstances of acquiring the material, even down to license plate numbers of the car. Some other common rules are, which employee conducted the transaction. The bylaw would require them to keep a register that is examinable by bylaw or police. And there'd be unhindered access by authorities to inspect the business, the register, and the yard. Certainly not suggesting this is a solve all the issue, but it's definitely a tool that would assist us as it has over the years with pawn shops. We've developed, after the initial shock of it, we have developed good working relationships with pawn shop owners. There's less of them than there used to be, but by and large, these individuals aren't interested in possessing stolen property. There are definitely arguments, mainly from the salvage yard people and the recyclers themselves, against these type of bylaws. Most of them revolve around the fact that they say they are not an arm of law enforcement. They shouldn't be made to conduct surveillance on citizens and pass on information to the authorities. The scope in which they accept things, this would make it very difficult to write down all these details. The unfortunate thing is there are some salvage yards that are taking materials that they must know were taken with by nefarious ways. So if we could rely on the reporting of suspicious sales, we wouldn't be where we are. So in my opinion, a bylaw of this nature should be considered. I think there'd be benefits of it. And like I say, we're faced with sort of a very unique situation for Kingston in that we've never had the scope of thefts that we're currently having.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you. Is that, your worship?
So thank you. That's very useful information. I think just to probe a little bit on this, is this an issue that's been raised like at the provincial level? Like, for example, through the Association of Chiefs of Police, has there been advocacy with the provincial government? I'm curious to know, because obviously I think you're doing the best you can do with the tools you have available. But if there's another tool, as you know, the regulation of scrap yards would be an example of that. If that's something that could be pushed by municipalities or by, you know, the big city mayors of Ontario to push the province to do what's happened in BC and Alberta, for example, that would be good to know. So I'm just curious to know where those discussions are at with them.
Certainly, yeah. Major discussions, and this really stems back a couple years to the theft of catalytic converters, and this is just a spin-off of that. And I know there's been a lot taking place with the Insurance Corporation of Canada, but we're still a long way from it because we know this is continually occurring. And as I sometimes can be referred to as harping on, our system's designed for deterrence and rehabilitation. And I know there's a lot more to that than just saying those two words, but you know, when it's frustrating, certainly for everyone, when it's, you know, when you get someone and they're already out on a number of releases based on the same offenses, and you know, jail isn't the answer to everything, but obviously we need to have a more coordinated effort globally on it. And I think there's other areas where we've really went strongly, like bail, you know, the bail reform, certainly to a degree with high risk offenders who are out on bail. But this is something we're all pushing as police services because it has such an impact locally and globally. And it's big business. There's a lot of money at stake here for, you know, when we look at the cost of obviously the cost of the item that's stolen, the wire itself, is pretty exorbitant. And then the cost for those organizations to come out and fix it are even worse. You know, it's they're spending a lot of money, and then you can't even put a value on the people who have voice over internet protocol telephones who are without a telephone for 4 or 5, 6 hours or 2 days, depending where they are. So it's something we'll continue to push forward with, and I think that's going to be the answer provincially is obviously having some efforts. We're seeing a lot of assistance for provincially now and in other areas, and this is just one that we're continue bringing to the forefront. And then locally trying to help ourselves, you know, with a bylaw of some sort. We'd be happy to work with the city staff if that's the route the city chooses to go in establishing something that will work for Kingston.
Good. Okay. Jimmy, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Brian, for bringing this up. I was thinking since we are talking here, I was going to ask the question anyway, that if there's any law in place federally or provincially or in the municipalities where we can hold accountable the people who buy those stolen stuff, pawn shop, and people buy on the Kijijis as well. I think it is a time for, as a city, to act together and put some strict measures in place to make it bring a little bit down. I know it's not going to fix the problem, but it's definitely will bring it down. And the people are stolen mostly. They're going to sell it for money, not donating it. So only they will throw on the Salvation Army or other places who accept the donations when they cannot sell it. So when they know they cannot sell it, access will bring down. That's what I'm believing it. So I think we all have to work together, police and as a city, and then we should bring some strict measure to the city so we can help the citizen to feel safe. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yael. Go ahead, Christian. Your hand on the screen is so little, sorry.
Yeah, so I just want to reinforce what Councillor Hassan just said, but maybe reframe it, that I think one of the strategies clearly needs to be as a deterrent. How can we reduce the profitability for people who acquire stolen copper? And certainly simply by forcing people to engage in record keeping of transactions and so forth, that imposes a cost on businesses in and of itself. I'm no expert in the copper industry, but I think not too many of us just kind of have a bunch of copper sitting around that we look to peddle sort of for a bit of cash here and there. So perhaps there's sort of a broader effort, not just on the registration side, but that we simply make it improper for businesses to accept these types of transactions, period. The other is that, so 2 points, maybe the chief can remind us about why is it that people don't end up spending time in jail for these offenses, and the structural changes that especially in recent time have aggravated this phenomenon. So that perhaps either on the policing side, the city side, or perhaps in collaboration, at a minimum, that we perhaps keep track and make clear to the community the cost involved, both on the policing side and in terms of the actual damage and theft to the community, so that the community can put together that changes made by governments when it comes to offenders have very clear financial costs for communities that the community then needs to bear, because I'm not sure that the public always makes the connections between what are sometimes well-intended changes in the criminal justice system and the significant financial consequences for both police forces and municipal governments.
Certainly. So, of course, we observed over the last number of years, obviously there was bail reform within our justice system. And our system is designed on the premise that everyone is innocent until proven guilty. And there's nobody in this room that would disagree with that. What that also does, though, is lends to people who are repeatedly caught in the act, performing the same, committing the same offenses. They're innocent until proven guilty, and they have their day in court. And pre-sentence custody is, and even pre-trial custody is something that our justice system does not want to see. So people who every day when an officer makes an arrest, the presumption is that person will be released. And at every opportunity the officer is to release, and if they don't release, then it goes to a justice of the peace. Oftentimes we've had recently where our officers are chastised for not releasing people, and which is unfortunate, but it's our system. And we're just seeing numerous releases. We never saw this before. We never saw people who were on 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, 10 forms of release for other offenses or similar act offenses that just continue to get released. And now that's all we see. So, that's, once again, it's that conflict of innocent until proven guilty versus, okay, at what point has the community had enough? Has everyone had enough? You don't have to go too far back when a person was released and they were placed on conditions. So let's say a person in this particular case is caught at midnight stealing copper. They would be arrested and charged. And if it's their first offense, and we can release them, and we would release them on conditions possibly to have a curfew from 9 p.m. at night to 7 in the morning. You're not to be outside. If you get caught, it's considered breach of undertaking. Years not that long ago, everyone knew, the defense lawyer, the judge, the Crown, the accused, the police, everyone knew you got 30 days. And it might have been 25 days in one jurisdiction or 30 days. That no longer exists. Even breach of conditions are only used as a last resort, because at the end of the day, they're the first offenses to be to be put off to the side or withdrawn. Also, as you can see, we have an issue in our justice system with a shortage of judges, shortage of courtrooms, shortage of court space, shortage of court staff. If you've seen the news, you saw in Toronto where cases are very serious cases are being thrown out. We're an offender-based society where and I'm not going to disagree with that offenders have rights, because they do. But we also have victims, and we have a victims bill of rights as well. And sometimes I speak to a number of officers who believe they're the only people other than our victim services people, who are consistently bringing up the victim bill of rights, because victims have rights too. I think their voice is just not as loud, but we're forced to work in this system. So all we do is we have to adapt, and we have to work with our judiciary and our courts, and we work within the law, and that's what it is. And right now we're seeing that, as you'll hear many chiefs say, 90% of the crime committed by 10% of the people or the population. And of course, as Inspector Pete alluded to, transient, everyone's moving around a lot more. We see that. We're same in Kingston here, where we see a lot of people coming into Kingston. Maybe they're not from here, and they've decided. I don't disagree. Kingston's a great community. Who wouldn't want to live here? We're just hoping you come here for the right reasons and not the wrong. So that's a little bit about jail. And as far as policing goes, certainly when we have situations like this, we divert our detectives to work on these cases. They're very complex. Obviously, if you take the square footage of Kingston and then multiply that by the number of miles of copper line that hang from our telephone poles, and then divide that by the number of police officers the Kingston police have, we're going to find that we can't have an officer at every second pole. So it is an opportunity that's ripe to be committed there. And we all know a crime has three things that has to happen: a victim, an offender, and an opportunity. So taking the opportunity away from this is a very difficult one, because the opportunity is plentiful. Taking the offender away from this is a fairly easy one when they're caught in the act. But until we get to that system, we'll continue chasing it. But our people are diverted. So then the other crimes that are being committed in our community, that, let's use theft of bicycles, for example, which is prolific in Kingston. Our general detectives are now diverting their resources to, obviously, this type of theft, and it's taking up a lot of their time. So then on the backside, the community gets upset because we're not dealing with certain things that are happening in various communities, whether it's mischief to property, or, we can look at post-secondary things. There's just things that are occurring in our community where our attention isn't as much as we'd like it in that area. So that's certainly one of the costs on the policing side that nobody sees until you become a victim, and then you're wondering, where were the police for this? And unfortunately, we're diverting, as Inspector Pete said, a lot of resources to this because it's a prolific offense. It's big. So I hope that answers your questions.
It does indeed. Thank you, Chief. Very succinct summary.
Gail, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the recommendation of a bylaw. I appreciate that opportunity, but I also want to mention that I hope people are thinking about this as the concept that it is not a panacea. It is one arrow in your quiver to allow you to do the things that you need to do. So I really appreciate the fact that you're coming up with recommendations for the city to work with that. One of the things that I would recommend in that is that if the city does consider this and pass the bylaw like this, Chief, you mentioned catalytic converters at one time were a hot ticket. I don't know if they still are, but the bylaw itself might be a little more wide-reaching to encompass things that might become a little bit more popular down the road. So that's so that we don't have to constantly say, oh, that only counts for copper. So that's my only recommendation. I think it's fabulous, but I do think if possible, if we broaden that perspective to give you more tools, as it were, as other things come forward.
Go ahead, Brian.
Thanks. Just briefly, great point. And I would suggest any regulation should just cover precious metals in general. Yes, we're experiencing a lot of copper theft, but it's not the only thing. I also just want to personally add, and I think generally for the police department, I am not at all suggesting that every salvager or recycler is knowingly taking in stolen property. I'm totally not. I think with a bylaw or some regulations in place, it would give us a step up in suggesting that certain people are, because if you run into a transaction that you're aware of and it's not recorded, you're moving closer to knowledge, consent, and control of stolen property. And those are things that could lead to criminal charges for individuals maybe working for a salvage yard or owning it. But certainly we're not suggesting that, and of course, there's lots of metals that come to these salvage yards for good reason. But to Mr. Luprec's point, most people don't have just a bunch of copper laying around. And certainly if they did, they probably wouldn't have a bunch the week after and the week after that. So the same people coming in with all this copper, I mean, pleading ignorance to it is getting a little old.
Thank you. Okay. Then I'll ask if there's any new business. No? Then we're going to move in camera. Can I get a motion? Very good, Christian, Jimmy, all in favor? And the moving camera after a, let's say, 8-minute break. Yep.